Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Stillwell. Let's talk about using AI and assessments to increase learning. Now, for this video, we have some objectives that we want to consider. The first one is that we hope you'll be able to use AI to create assessments that increase learning, that use various question types to meet different purposes, that require 4 different levels of thinking from lower order to higher order, that do not cause unnecessary stress. And I hope you'll be able to do this by using a prompting framework as well as some advanced techniques. Now, the first thing is assessment is good for learning. And there are a few reasons why we would say this. One is that while tests, quizzes, and other assessments help us to learn, when they ask us to do things like recall what we have learned, we can call that retrieval, where you're pulling something out of your memory. That act of pulling it out of your memory is actually a part of learning. It can also ask us to recall things that we learned long ago. That's called spaced repetition, where we take a break from learning something and then we come back to it. And that's really great when a quiz can recycle things and make us remember those things. Quizzes can also make us focus on a mix of different topics. And when we mix things, we make our brains work a little bit harder. It's called interleaving. And that's also good. So quizzes and tests and other assessments are good for that. And my favorite, though, is when they're frequent. So if we have a lot of tests or quizzes or assessments, different ways of checking our knowledge and doing these activities, we learn more. We could also think about different kinds of questions on our tests and quizzes and assessments and the different benefits that come with them. For example, we might want questions that recycle things, that talk about something from maybe the beginning of the year, just to remember them again and improve the learning, make that stronger. We can also have advanced questions sometimes that really ask students to show what they know. Of course, we'll have typical average questions as well, but working in a few advanced questions can be great. We can have multiple choice questions if we want to set things up to be able to give students immediate feedback. We can also have open-ended questions that gather deeper, more elaborate responses. Another kind of question that maybe we don't use so often, but perhaps we should, is a kind of self-reflection question where students assess for themselves how well they are doing, what they understand, and maybe they can set some goals for themselves. Now, in Vietnam, we can also think about other ways to think about questions, and that would be if we look at some documents that describe good lesson plans and good tests. And when we see this, we see that it's nice if learning can be assessed in a progression from lower order, kind of very basic understanding of things, to higher order thinking. And what that means is, well, there are 4 levels specified. The first one is recognition. This would be just kind of remembering facts. And we can make questions that ask students to just remember facts. Or the second level would be a little bit higher, comprehension. You're able to explain what you understand. We can go to even higher levels when we can apply things. Maybe we can remember what we learned in class and apply them to problems that we explored in class as well. And then when we get really high about it, we can synthesize what we know with high application to maybe new problems that we did not see in class. Of course, we can ask AI to help us. We can prompt AI to give questions at these different levels of challenge, so we can make assessments that are really aligning with what we're trying to do in Vietnam. It's good to remember also, though, that assessments don't need to be stressful. Many people do associate tests and quizzes with being stressed out, but we can recall things, we can challenge ourselves to remember things and see what we know without it being so stressful. For instance, we can play games, right? Games like Kahoot involve the same kinds of answering questions and trying to remember things. We can have challenges where we give students maybe a sentence to translate or something like that, where it's more about like challenging students to do something that might be a little difficult. And there's an understanding that you may fail, you may succeed. It's like a puzzle. We can have some fun with this. We can also have practice quizzes that are low stakes. They're not so important. We can have group quizzes where students maybe work together and all of them answer a test together. They all put their names on the test and they all share the same grade. And maybe it's not a very important grade. Maybe it's just a participation score. Another activity I like is a this or that activity, which is a great warm-up, actually. At the beginning of class, students can talk to their neighbors. They can look at some things that they see on the board, and they can decide which one is better, this or that. They could talk about favorite foods or other fun activities, or it could be an assessment where they look at something like, should we say a bigger house or a more big house? Should we say the cat is on the bed or the cat is at the bed? Things like that, right? And students are talking to each other, they're discussing, and in a sense, it can be for the teacher when they listen in, an evaluation, an assessment. Do they understand this? What do they need to work on? And it doesn't need to be stressful. Now, we're talking about making lots of assessments. and offering them frequently. And that is extra work. So that does not make me a very popular person right now. Of course, when we collaborate with AI, it's not so difficult. And that's one thing that I'm very excited about with AI is yes, creating all of these assessments in the past would have been a lot of extra work, too much extra work. It would be unrealistic to expect us to do so many things. But now it's a little bit more realistic. We can do it. It all begins, of course, by interacting with the AI and typing something into that window, typing in a prompt, right? We're telling the AI what we want. And we can use the best ideas for how to ask AI for what you want. And so one way to do this is to specify 4 things. The first thing is a role plus a task, plus a context, plus a format or style or both. Let's go a little deeper on each of those. If we're talking about creating assessments and we want to write a good prompt to get the AI to give us something very useful, we might start with a role. And the role would be where we assign the AI some kind of expertise. We're saying, you're an expert in something. And we want you to focus on that because the AI knows so many things across all of the information that it has. We're telling it where to focus. For example, we could say you're a Vietnamese EFL assessment specialist. So focus on EFL assessment. Or maybe you're a middle school English teacher. So focus on what you know about that. Or perhaps we could say that it's an expert exam question designer for grade 9 national exams in Vietnam. Or even a game-based learning designer if you're trying to come up with questions for Kahoot or other platforms. The next part of a good prompt is to give a task where we specify what is it that we want it to do. We want it to make something, create something. What is that? And that could be something like 3 self-reflection questions after a speaking test. It could be 2 advanced application questions based on a reading. It could be short multiple choice quiz on vocabulary. Perhaps we want to ask for 4 open-ended discussion questions for a group activity, or 3 recycling questions that mix grammar from units 1 to 4. All kinds of things we can ask for. And the point here is we're being very hands-on. We're being very involved in designing the test. We, as the teacher, know what we want, what is best for our students, and we ask the AI to give it to us by being specific in those requests. Now, after we talk about the role and the task, we can describe the context. What is the teaching environment like? What is the learning situation for the students? So we give details like in Vietnam. If we don't specify that it's Vietnam, AI might give us a very general response that could be about anywhere in the world. Specify your students' age and their grade level and their English proficiency. Give those kinds of details so the AI knows how to design the questions and what kind of language to use. And so it could look something like, make this for grade 6 students in Vietnam with A2 level English. After that, we want to add some more details about what we're looking for. What's the format? What's the style? The format could be something like a multiple choice test or a this or that activity or short answer questions or essay questions. The length, right? How many questions are we looking for? How complex should the questions be? And the style, right? It's suitable for 12-year-olds or whatever it is, right? So we can specify all these things as much as we want. When you put all the pieces together, it might look something like this. You're a middle school EFL assessment specialist in Vietnam. Design a short recycling quiz to review the vocabulary in units 1 to 4 on school, food, and family. The test is for grade 6 students at CEFR level A2 in a rural Vietnamese classroom, and use multiple choice format, 8 questions suitable for a classroom Kahoot game using everyday contexts familiar to the students. Very detailed prompt. The more detailed we are, the better responses we might get, and also the better we can judge the output we get because we know what we asked for and we can look at it closely to see if that's really what we're getting. Now, some advanced techniques. We can also make quizzes about content on websites. We can provide a link to a website for the AI to refer to, and we can ask for a quiz. But before we get too far, we want to make sure that it's actually accessing it because sometimes there are problems. So first we make sure the AI is able to access the website we provide the website and we say, provide a summary of that website so I can see if it's accurate. And so then the AI will either tell you, sorry, I can't get there, or it will give you a summary and then you do a quick check to see if it's accurate. If the AI provides evidence that it can read the site, proceed. If it cannot, maybe try another platform, maybe switch from Gemini to ChatGPT or something else. But then you can say, looks good. Now make, 3, multiple choice or open-ended questions about the content of the website, right? We can use a good prompt again. But the point is, we can have the AI refer to something and build a quiz around that. And it doesn't have to be a website. We can also upload documents for the AI to refer to. So here's an example from today. GPT-5 is new, and so you'll see here that there's a plus sign there. And if we click on that plus sign, it says add files and more. So we click on it, and we get that option to add photos and files. And so when we click on that, it will let us access our own documents, and we can upload something as a reference. Once again, we want to make sure the AI is actually able to read it. Sometimes it will pretend it can. Sometimes it will hallucinate, if you remember what that is, by inventing answers that aren't true. So let's start off by verifying. So we can say, look at attached document 1 and tell me the requirements for a good test in Vietnam. Maybe I gave it one of those documents that specifies what a test should look like in Vietnam. And maybe I gave it 2 documents. Maybe the second document is the actual content that I want to make a quiz about. So I could say, look in document 2 and give me a summary. And I would probably actually name the documents here. Once I get some responses that make me comfortable and confident that the AI is indeed referring to things properly and I'm able to access them, then I might say, let's make a quiz, right? Let's make 8 open-ended questions about document 2. Make sure the questions match the 4 levels for a good test that are mentioned in document 1, which, remember, in my example, is that document that says what is a good test in Vietnam. Now, once we get some output from the AI, we have to look at it. We have to look at it closely, and we evaluate it, and we can revise it. We can get something better through a dialogue, right? We can say, let's try again. Make sure the questions use English at CEFR level A2. Lots of times it will forget that. You have to remind it to simplify the English for you. Or maybe it missed something else. Maybe you have to say you forgot to include 2 high application questions. I see that you've got the lower level thinking, but the higher order application, high application, maybe that got left out. Finally, once you have a quiz and you're pretty happy with it, another step you can do is you can share that final output with another AI. Maybe switch from ChatGPT to Gemini, or go to Claude or somewhere else, and you can ask for areas for improvement. You can say something like, look at the following quiz. What questions or instructions might be confusing for a test taker? What gaps are there? What have I missed? What kind of questions are missing here? We can ask another AI to give us more ideas and make our test even better. Okay. So I hope at this point we've covered the objectives, but since this is a video about assessment, I'm not going to just repeat these objectives and say, that's what we did. I'm going to turn this into an assessment, and this assessment will be a self-assessment. So let's turn all of those objectives back there into questions, right? Instead of saying that you will be able to use AI to create assessments that increase learning, let's make it a question for you. How could you use AI to create assessments that increase learning? Can you think of some ideas? What about how could you use various question types to meet different purposes? Well, what are the different question types that we talked about in this video? How could you require 4 different levels of thinking from lower order to higher order? Do you remember what those 4 levels were? And do you remember how you could work those into a prompt? How can we make assessments that don't cause stress? Do all assessments have to be these examinations, these exams that students study for and they lose sleep and they feel very stressed about? Or are there other kinds of tests and quizzes and things that we can do? And what prompting framework could you use? We talked about something that had 4 parts. Do you remember what those 4 parts were? Finally, what are some advanced techniques you could use? Give you a hint. It involved referencing websites. It involved referencing documents. It involved having a dialogue with the AI afterwards. And there was one more thing. It was maybe I was on ChatGPT already, and then I go to Gemini with my finished test, and I asked Gemini to do one more thing. Do you remember what that was? Well, that's your test at the end of this video. And so thank you for joining me. I hope this was useful, and that's it for now.